call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Building Earthquake-Prone Buildings Amendment Bill. Interrupted debate on second reading.
Members, when we were last debating the second reading of the Building Earthquake-Prone Buildings Amendment Bill, Mojo Mathis had the call and has 3 minutes 30 seconds remaining if she wishes to continue. I call David Seymour, 5 minutes.
Mr Speaker, I rise on behalf of the ACT Party in opposition to the Buildings Earthquake-Prone Buildings Amendment Bill. Mr Speaker, this debate has been characterised by overflowing wells of empathy from members around the House. And it's difficult not to when we recall the tragic losses in Canterbury and when that city is still shaking anew even in the past few days. However, Mr Speaker, the warmth in some members' hearts appears to have drifted up to their heads into policy making. Because, Mr Speaker, when you make public policy, real empathy is about making it for people. Mr Speaker, the first mistake in this policy process was not to base the policy making on the risks faced by New Zealanders, but on applying an arbitrary standard of 34% of new building code across the country. And what that did from the point of view of individual New Zealanders is it meant that the costs and benefits of applying this policy were vastly different for the risks that New Zealanders face as individuals, and also vastly different in terms of cost-benefit analysis between different regions of New Zealand. In fact, Mr Speaker, some analysis of the initial bill said that the Auckland population would be spending 3,000 times more to save a life than people in Wellington. Mr Speaker, the Minister made a very revealing comment in his speech to this second reading. He said even as an engineer, he was surprised at how much variability there is in earthquake risk across New Zealand. Well, Mr Speaker, with respect, only a member from the South Island could say that. We Aucklanders know that while for our excesses and sins we may well one day drown in runs of lava from our many volcanoes, the risk of an earthquake in our part of the country is practically nil. And so the Minister got pushed back hard, and he introduced a differential level of strengthening for different parts of the country. He said, it's okay, we'll exclude some buildings and some structures, and that was admirable. And he said that we would have more time, up to 50 years, to strengthen in low-risk areas, Mr Speaker. But raising the question, if it's not important to do this for the next 50 years, then how urgent and how important is the strengthening overall? Mr Speaker, the bill was somewhat improved, but according to the regulatory impact statement for the bill and its new state, the net present value for this particular piece of legislation is negative $750 million. Mr Speaker, in Auckland, even just to find out if a particular building complies with the risks being faced, complies with the requirements of the legislation, I apologise, is estimated to be $10,000 to $20,000 per building. Mr Speaker, if we were making empathic public policy, we would be highly focused on ensuring that the amount of money spent, the resources that go into earthquake strengthening, are commensurate with the price that we're prepared to pay to avoid and mitigate other risks. And yet, Mr Speaker, in Auckland, we will be spending money on earthquake strengthening when the risks that we face by being in those buildings are hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of times lower than the risks that we face every day in the course of riding bikes, driving cars and flying planes. Mr Speaker, GNS research was commissioned by Auckland Council and suggested in Auckland this legislation might reduce deaths over 10,000 years by 3 lives, to save only 3 lives. Well, Mr Speaker, there's a very simple way that this bill could be enhanced and could be passed, and that would simply be to exempt the low-risk areas that have already been identified in the enhanced bill. Mr Speaker, take away those $10,000 and $20,000 costs that the Minister has admitted are not addressing any urgent concern because he says you've got 50 years to do it, and that would be a bill that the ACT Party could support. But right now it is an unempathic bill that does not deal with the risks faced by New Zealanders, but seeks to preserve an arbitrary standard at all costs. Thank you, Mr Speaker.